Paris, August 13, 2022, Parc des Princes. PSG were beating Montpellier comfortably, 5-2. A routine win in the opening weeks of a new season that was supposed to mark a fresh start. A reset for a club that had spent years trying to make three of the biggest egos in football coexist in the same dressing room. But football has a way of exposing exactly what a club has not fixed, no matter how many wins go on the scoreboard. In the 21st minute, Kylian Mbappe stepped up to take a penalty. He missed it. Goalkeeper Jonas Omlin saved it comfortably. A few minutes later, before the half-time whistle, PSG won a second penalty. And this is where the night turned into something that would define an entire relationship. Mbappe walked toward the ball. He was the club's designated first-choice penalty taker, a role agreed before the season even began, set by manager Christophe Galtier himself. Mbappe takes penalties. Neymar takes them only if Mbappe is unavailable, but Neymar did not move aside. He picked up the ball himself, looked at Mbappe, and walked to the spot. Cameras caught what happened next. Mbappe leaned in close to Neymar's ear, said something nobody outside that moment fully heard, but everybody could read from his face. Frustration? Disbelief, the look of a 23-year-old World Cup winner being told, without words, just with action, that the agreement made before the season meant nothing in that moment. Neymar waved him away, stepped up, scored. Mbappe stood several yards back, hands on his hips, staring at the ground. This was the moment everything that had been building quietly inside the Paris Saint-Germain dressing room finally became visible to the entire football world. To understand why this single penalty meant so much more than 2 points in a league match, you have to go back to where this relationship actually started. 2017, PSG had just completed the two most expensive transfers in football history within weeks of each other. Neymar arrived from Barcelona for €222 million, a deal that broke every transfer record that existed. Mbappe arrived from Monaco on loan with an obligation to buy, an 18-year-old French sensation who had already announced himself as the most exciting young talent in the sport. At the start, they were close. Genuinely close. Neymar, older, more experienced, already a Champions League winner and global superstar, took the young Frenchman under his wing. They trained together, socialized together. On the pitch, they combined for some of the most thrilling attacking football French league had ever seen. For 2 seasons, that partnership worked. PSG dominated Ligue 1, the front three, eventually joined by Edinson Cavani and later Lionel Messi, terrified every defence in France and occasionally Europe too. But something was shifting underneath the surface, and it had nothing to do with football ability. It had to do with power. By 2022, the dynamic inside PSG had completely changed. Mbappe was no longer the teenage prodigy, grateful to be alongside senior superstars. He was a World Cup winner, the best young player in the world, and crucially, he held something neither Neymar nor anyone else at the club possessed: leverage. In the summer of 2022, Real Madrid had been close to signing Mbappe as a free agent. The deal was reportedly all but finalized. Mbappe would walk away from PSG for nothing, joining the club he had supported as a boy. PSG panicked. The club's hierarchy, desperate to avoid losing their biggest asset for free, offered him an extraordinary new contract. Reports placed his salary among the highest in the history of football, and alongside the money came something that mattered just as much to Mbappe: influence, a seat at the table, a voice in how the club was run. Sources close to the club later confirmed what many suspected, that part of the price PSG paid to keep Mbappe was sporting control. Say in transfers, say in squad direction, say, eventually, in who stayed and who left. And the man Mbappe reportedly wanted gone first was the same man who had mentored him 5 years earlier, Neymar. According to multiple reports that emerged in the months that followed, Mbappe had pushed PSG's hierarchy to consider selling Neymar. Not because of football reasons primarily, but because of discipline, nightlife, and what Mbappe viewed as a lack of professionalism that he believed was holding the club back from the Champions League glory it craved. Neymar found out. And once he knew that the player he had once protected and guided was now actively working behind the scenes to push him out the door, the relationship between them shifted permanently. Whatever warmth had existed in 2017 evaporated into something colder, wearier, more transactional. By the time the Montpellier match arrived in August 2022, that tension had been building for months beneath a surface of forced smiles and pre-season photo opportunities. The penalty was not really about the penalty. It was about who PSG actually belonged to. After the final whistle, the conflict did not stay on the pitch. According to reporting from Le Parisien, the argument continued into the dressing room, voices raised, tempers still hot from the match, and it escalated to the point that Sergio Ramos, the most senior, most experienced player in that PSG squad, a man who had captained Real Madrid through some of the most intense pressure cookers in football, had to physically step in between Mbappe and Neymar to keep the situation from boiling over completely. Think about what that means. Sergio Ramos, a man who had stood toe-to-toe with the fiercest rivalries in Spanish football for over a decade. Standing in a Paris dressing room, physically separating two of his own teammates after a routine 5-2 win over Montpellier. This was not a disagreement about tactics. This was two of the most famous athletes on the planet on the verge of something the club desperately needed to keep out of the headlines, and failed to. Manager Christophe Galtier tried to play it down publicly. "There is no discomfort," he told reporters. "We quickly met the next day to iron out all that and say what we had to say to each other." Nobody who had watched the dressing room reports believed that the issue was actually resolved that quickly, because this was never just about a penalty kick. It was about two men who had once trusted each other completely and now found themselves on opposite sides of a power struggle that neither of them was willing to lose. To understand how something so close had fallen apart so completely, you have to listen to the people who watched it happen from the inside. Thiago Silva was PSG's captain when Neymar and Mbappe first arrived in the summer of 2017. He witnessed the beginning of the story personally, and years later, in an interview with L'Équipe, he described exactly how it started. At the end of the match against Monaco, Mbappe wanted to speak with me, Silva recalled. He said, "Even if Neymar signs, I also want to come and be part of this team." They both arrived that summer and their relationship was incredible. They were very close, among those who had the most fun together on a daily basis. A teenage Mbappe had wanted to play alongside Neymar so badly that he personally lobbied PSG's captain to help make it happen. That is not the behaviour of two men destined to need a senior defender to physically separate them in a dressing room 5 years later. Something happened in between, and Silva, looking back on it years afterward, admitted he genuinely did not know exactly what. "I didn't understand why they drifted apart," he said. I don't know which of the two caused the rift, but it made me sad. They are two great guys, and it's disappointing that it ended like that. If PSG's own captain could not pinpoint the exact cause, the answer was clearly more complicated than one single moment. Neymar eventually gave his own account, years after leaving PSG for Saudi Arabia, sitting on a podcast with Brazilian World Cup winner Romario. He was asked directly whether Mbappe was difficult to deal with. His answer was layered with both affection and resentment. No, he is not. I have my things with him, we had a little fight, but he was fundamental for us when he arrived, Neymar said. I used to call him Golden Boy. I always played with him, I said. He was going to be one of the best. I always helped, talked to him, he came to my place, we had dinner together, we had some good years of partnership. Then came the part that mattered. But after Messi came, he was a little jealous. He didn't want to split me with anyone. And then there were some fights, a change in behaviour. Read what Neymar is actually claiming there. Not that Mbappe disliked him professionally, not that there was a disagreement over tactics or penalties, jealousy. Neymar was suggesting that when Lionel Messi joined PSG in 2021, completing arguably the most star-studded front three in football history, Mbappe could not tolerate sharing Neymar's attention, his friendship, his place in the dressing room hierarchy with a third superstar. It is a remarkable claim, not because it paints Mbappe as ruthless or calculating, the more common criticism levelled at him in the years since. It paints him as something almost the opposite, possessive, insecure about a friendship he had once pursued so eagerly that he begged a club captain to help make it happen. Mbappe's response to all of this said as much about him as Neymar's accusation did. Speaking to TNT Sports Brazil after Neymar's comments went public, Mbappe did not deny the fights. He did not deny the cooling of the relationship. He did not engage with the word jealous at all. The truth is, I have nothing to say, Mbappe said. I'm very concentrated on what I'm doing here in Madrid. I have a lot of respect for Neymar. I could talk many times about Neymar, but I want to remember the positives of a unique footballer in the history of football and all the moments we had in Paris. All the best to Neymar and to all his family and friends. No retaliation, no counter-accusation, no defending himself against the jealousy claim by pointing out his own version of events, which, according to separate reporting, included frustration at Neymar's discipline, his approach to Paris nightlife, and what Mbappe reportedly viewed as a lack of full commitment to winning the Champions League that PSG's enormous spending was supposed to deliver. Mbappe simply declined to fight back in public. This was, in its own way, the most telling detail in the entire story. Because the man who reportedly pushed PSG's hierarchy to consider selling Neymar, the man who, according to multiple reports, grew frustrated enough with his former mentor's habits to actively work against him behind closed doors, chose silence the moment a microphone was pointed at him and an easy opportunity to retaliate publicly was sitting right there. That restraint is not nothing. Whatever damage had been done between them privately, Mbappe was not willing to do further damage publicly. By the time both men's careers had moved past PSG entirely, the picture had become clearer, even if the full truth never fully emerged. Mbappe was at Real Madrid, finally fulfilling the dream that PSG had spent years and hundreds of millions of euros trying to prevent, thriving under Carlo Ancelotti, becoming the club's record goalscorer in the process, 256 goals in 308 PSG appearances behind him, a new chapter ahead of him in Spain. Neymar had gone the opposite direction, Saudi Arabia, Al Hilal, injuries that mounted faster than his recovery could keep pace with. Eventually a return home to Santos, the club where it had all started for him, a far quieter stage than the one he had once shared with Mbappe and Messi in Paris. Two men who had once been inseparable, who had combined for 9 major trophies, who had pursued each other's signatures, who had eaten dinner at each other's homes, ended up scattered to opposite corners of the football world, speaking about each other only when asked, choosing their words carefully, never quite landing on the same version of what actually happened. So what was this rivalry in the end? Not a rivalry built on hatred, in the way Pepe and Messi understood hatred with boots and stomps and deliberate physical cruelty. Not built on mockery in the way Pique tormented Ronaldo with a microphone and perfectly timed jokes. This was something quieter, and in some ways sadder. Two men who had genuinely cared for each other once, who Thiago Silva himself called two great guys, slowly drifting into a power struggle that neither of them fully wanted, shaped by money, by status, by a club that handed one of them more influence than the dressing room could comfortably absorb. Mbappe wanted control over his own career and the team around him. That ambition was not unreasonable on its own, but exercising it meant, at some point, deciding that Neymar, the man who had once called him Golden Boy, who had mentored him, who had vouched for him before he had even arrived in Paris, was now an obstacle rather than an ally. And Neymar, watching his influence diminish as a younger, more disciplined, more commercially valuable teammate inherited the keys to the club he had once ruled, responded the only way pride allowed him to. He called it jealousy. Maybe it was. Maybe it was something closer to a young superstar discovering for the first time that loyalty and ambition do not always point in the same direction, and that when they diverge, even the closest friendships in football are not built to survive the choice. That penalty in August 2022 was never really about who took the kick. It was about who PSG, and eventually who each man's own career actually belonged to.